Have you ever felt like someone wasn't just draining your energy but invading your mind? Some people don't argue to win, they argue to unravel you. There's a silent power that toxic people fear, and it's not louder words, but a stronger mind. Toxic people don't always break you with insults or cruelty. Often, they break you quietly by creeping into your thoughts, making you overthink, forcing you to explain yourself, and slowly eroding your sense of worth. They don't need to destroy you. They just need to make you doubt yourself. But here's the truth they hope you never realize. You don't defeat manipulators by arguing. You defeat them by becoming unreachable. And that's where the power of psychological boundaries comes in. These aren't just invisible shields. They are mental, fortress-eyes, quiet, and unshakable. They don't just protect you from toxic people, they erase you from their radar. You become emotionally invisible to those who feed on chaos. In this video, we're going to unpack 7 Stoic-inspired psychological boundaries, not walls that isolate, but powerful lines of mental discipline that make manipulators lose their grip completely. Because if you're tired of being yanked into someone else's emotional storm, this is the missing strategy. And no, it's not about shouting louder, proving your point, or even walking away dramatically. The strongest power isn't rage, it's composure, not passive calmness, but stoic composure, the kind that doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't explain. It just is. A calm that comes from not reacting to emotional bait, no matter how tempting it is. Toxic people thrive on reactivity. It's their currency. They push your buttons, not to understand you but to test if they still have control. They use words like darts, not because those words are true, but because they want to see you flinch, defend, overreact, and the moment you react emotionally, you lose the high ground. They're no longer fighting you, they're controlling you. Ever noticed how a narcissist twists the narrative the second they're confronted? Or how a passive-aggressive person delivers a harmless comment that leaves a bruise in your mind for hours? That's not clumsiness. That's emotional warfare, and your first line of defense. The boundary that sets the tone for everyone after it is this: I will not allow toxic people to control my emotional state. Simple words, but revolutionary power, because the moment you stop reacting, you pull the plug on their control. You take away the one thing they depend on. Your reaction. Without your emotional fuel, their fire burns out. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't just preach calm, they trained for it. Epictetus once said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. That one sentence flips the whole dynamic. You always have a choice. You can choose not to take the bait, and manipulative people hate that. They hate when guilt trips fall flat. When silent treatments don't trigger anxiety. When you look right through their emotional games and don't even blink. This isn't cold detachment, it's mental mastery. Not fear-based silence, but clarity-driven stillness. The kind of quiet that says, you can no longer reach me, not here, not anymore. Because the truth is, toxic people don't want truth, they want chaos. So when you keep trying to reason with someone who has no intention of being honest, you're not solving anything. You're stepping into their arena. And in that arena, emotions are weapons. And your reaction is ammunition. But not anymore. You're not ignoring reality. You're taking command of it. You're speaking without words. You no longer get to decide. How I feel. Let's bring this to life. Picture this. You're in a conversation, and a toxic person says, "Oh, I see. You're too good to care now, huh?" most people would take the bait. They'd feel pressured to explain themselves, to defend, or to offer reassurance. But someone who has mastered this emotional boundary, they pause, they breathe, and they calmly respond, believe whatever you need to. That's not cold. That's mental freedom. You've just denied them their favorite currency, your emotional engagement. You remained in control without needing to justify, correct, or convince. That's emotional intelligence at the highest level. But how do you train this boundary? It's not a one-time decision. It's a muscle one that grows stronger, especially when exercised in discomfort. Try these steps. 1. Pause before you respond. Even just 3 seconds of silence can break the automatic reaction and shift the power. Dynamic. 2. Breathe into your body. Step out of your head. Feel your feet. Slow your heartbeat. Bring yourself back to the present. 3. Internally name the trigger. Acknowledge it. This is emotional bait. I'm not taking it. 4. Speak less. Observe more. Your power lies not in your defense, but in your awareness. With enough practice, this becomes second nature. People will try to provoke you and you'll simply smile. Not because you don't care, but because you've outgrown the need to. But underneath this boundary lies something deeper. Emotional non-reactivity isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming selectively responsive. You still feel, you still care, but you choose where your energy goes. That's why this boundary is so powerful. It doesn't make you less human. It makes you a human with direction. You stop living at the mercy of other people's emotions. You start designing your own inner world. And in that world, toxic people have no place. When you go silent on someone who feeds off attention, you don't just walk away, you cut off their oxygen. In a world addicted to noise, silence is rebellion. And to toxic people, silence is psychological warfare. Why? Because their entire strategy depends on your response, your explanation, your anger, your desire to be understood. When you stop playing that game, when you meet provocation with stillness, you take away the one thing they need to control. Your emotional involvement. Silence isn't passive, it's a power move. Let's make this clear. Silence isn't weakness. It's not avoidance. It's a conscious refusal to be pulled into their emotional vortex. It says, I see you. I understand what you're doing, and I'm not engaging. That's one of the highest forms of emotional intelligence, because it protects your peace without sacrificing your dignity. And here's the brutal truth. Toxic people aren't afraid of confrontation. They're afraid of disconnection. They survive by gaining access to your mind. They want to know what you think, what you feel, what still gets to you. Your silence becomes their worst nightmare. Because when you stop explaining yourself, they realize, I no longer have access to this person's reality. And for someone who thrives on control, that is devastating. When your face stays calm, when you say nothing, they begin to unravel, because now they're left alone with their thoughts. And toxic minds hate silence. In silence, they're forced to confront themselves. A real-life example. Imagine you're being gaslighted in a conversation. They say things like, you're being too sensitive, or, I never said that. You know it's not true. Every part of you wants to speak up, to set the record straight, but instead of arguing, you lock eyes with them, ... stay silent, ... and simply walk away. In that moment, you didn't just protect your peace, you shattered their illusion of control without saying a word. That's spiritual discipline in action. Not every battle is yours to fight. especially the ones designed to drain you. Here's the truth: silence is a shield, not a sword. People often mistake silence for passive aggression, but in Stoicism, silence is emotional containment. It's the ability to feel anger without being controlled by it, to feel pain without reacting impulsively, to hold your ground without needing to dominate. It's your way of saying, I don't owe you my energy, my presence, or my words. That's self-mastery. That's power. So how do you build this silent strength? 1. Know when to stop talking. Not every misunderstanding requires your explanation. 2. Let the silence stretch. Don't rush to fill the void. Let them sit with it. 3. Watch your body language. Stay still. Breathe calmly. Don't flinch. 4. Exit with clarity. Walking away is a complete sentence. 5. Use strategic pauses in heated moments. 5-second pause can make you appear 10 times more powerful. This isn't about playing games. It's about commanding respect without ever having to beg for it. The inner game of detachment. Silence without inner strength is just avoidance. But silence with intention, that's liberation. It sends a clear message. I choose what affects me. I choose who gets access to my emotional space. You don't do it to punish others. You do it to protect your mental clarity, emotional regulation, and inner peace. Detachment isn't indifference. It's choosing not to lose yourself in people who've already lost themselves. So why does this work and why does it hurt them? Because when you go silent, they can't guilt trip you. They can't manipulate your reaction. They can't feel superior by triggering your emotional outbursts. Instead, they feel invisible, powerless, irrelevant. And for someone addicted to control, irrelevance is a form of psychological death. You didn't fight them. You didn't insult them. You simply stopped showing up to the performance. And that's how you win. In an age of constant connection, accessibility has become a trap. Society expects you to be emotionally available, digitally responsive, and mentally on call at all times. They demand instant access to your mind, your energy, your focus. And toxic people, they exploit that. They blur boundaries. They test limits. They treat your availability as permission to invade. But here's a timeless Stoic truth. You lose your power the moment you become too easy to reach. Silence is control. Let's be brutally honest. The more available you are, the more manipulators learn your rhythms. The more they study your reactions, the easier it becomes to reshape your reality through calculated intrusion. Think of a narcissist who always calls right when you're busiest. Let's pick up where we left off. When you start honoring your time and emotional space, everything begins to shift. Maybe it's that dramatic friend who always trauma dumps the night before your big presentation. They don't value your time, not because they're inherently disrespectful, but because you haven't shown them how to. You see, boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're about no longer giving people automatic access to your mind, your heart, or your presence. The Stoics had a name for this: strategic withdrawal. They weren't obsessed with being everywhere for everyone. They didn't seek to perform or please, they aimed to be present. And presence requires clarity. They understood something powerful. Your energy is sacred. Your time is finite. And your peace, it's the ground where clarity grows. So instead of constantly reacting, they chose intentional distance, not out of pride, but out of self-preservation. And here's what happens when you start pulling back emotionally. Toxic people begin to panic. Not because they miss you, but because they can no longer control when or how you show up. Imagine this. You used to reply instantly to angry texts. But now, after setting real boundaries, you pause, you breathe, and you reply hours later, or not at all. At first, they escalate. More texts, more guilt trips. They accuse you of being cold, selfish, even cruel. But eventually, they realize something terrifying. They're no longer calling the shots. That's when the power shift begins. Because you're no longer emotionally available on demand. You're no longer predictable. You're sovereign. Let's clear this up. Being unavailable doesn't mean becoming a recluse. It doesn't mean rejecting the world or isolating yourself. It means you stop explaining your piece to people who only twist your words. It means you exit arguments you never agreed to. It means your emotional presence is no longer a free-fall. Attention is now earned, not assumed. It's like the difference between a candle flickering in a public hallway and a guarded flame in a sacred sanctuary. So, how do you build this strategic unavailability without guilt? 1. Delay your response. Just because they message you doesn't mean you owe them your immediate attention. 2. Schedule your presence. Protect your time. Honor your deep focus. Decide when you show up. 3. Don't explain your silence. You don't owe anyone an emotional receipt for choosing peace. 4. Limit digital access. Mute toxic threads. Use do not disturb. Block when necessary. 5. Say clearly, I'm not available for that. Simple, firm, done. This isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. In motion, here's the psychological shift. When you choose to be unavailable, manipulators lose their grip. They can't predict you, can't guilt you, can't access you like before. And so, they'll call you distant, arrogant, cold. But what they're really saying is, you don't need my approval anymore, and that terrifies me. Because what is rare becomes valuable. What is always available becomes expected, then resented, then used. This boundary makes you rare again, and in that rarity, the right people respect you, the wrong ones fear you, and the noise fades. You stop being a sponge for other people's chaos and become a mirror that only reflects what honors your peace. So here's your reminder. Stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Read that again, because one of the most exhausting traps is thinking you owe toxic people an explanation for protecting your peace. You don't, and you never did. Let's briefly recall. In the previous part, we talked about how toxic people don't seek understanding, they seek access. And now, we take a deeper look at why your urge to explain might actually be a trap. At first glance, explaining yourself may seem harmless, even respectful. But in emotionally manipulative relationships, every explanation becomes an opening. A tool, a crack they exploit. They ask, why didn't you answer me? Why are you being distant? Why can't we talk this out like mature adults? But these aren't questions meant to understand. They're hooks, traps disguised as dialogue. And the more you explain, the more you get tangled. They interrupt, distort, shift blame. They gaslight. They minimize your feelings. They take your words and twist them just enough to make you doubt yourself. That's not communication. That's control, wearing a friendly mask. It's the difference between stoic silence and emotional justification. A stoic mind doesn't beg to be understood. It doesn't plead for validation. It knows what's true, and that's enough. When your decision is grounded in your values, clarity, and peace, you don't need to hold court. You act, You walk away. You let go. That's quiet confidence. That's inner strength. That's emotional maturity in real time. The guilt loop and how to break it here. The trap toxic people rely on. Your guilt reflex. They know exactly where your emotional buttons are, and they push them with precision. If they can trigger your guilt, you'll likely bend. You'll over-explain, you'll hesitate, you'll back down, but understand this, they're not looking for truth, they're looking for leverage. So next time you feel the pressure to justify a boundary, pause, breathe, and remind yourself, this boundary is not a discussion. A personal example, let's say you've cut off contact with a controlling ex, but they keep texting. Why are you ignoring me? I just want closure. You feel the urge to reply to be nice, to bring things to a peaceful end. But deep down, you know, this person never respected your peace. They don't want closure. They want to pull you back into the cycle. So instead of explaining, you stay silent or you respond simply, I'm not available for this conversation. Take care. No defense, no guilt, no follow-up. That's not cruelty. That's emotional discipline. That's protecting your energy. No is a complete sentence here's a mindset shift that changes everything. No is not the start of an argument. It's the end of a transaction. You don't need to justify why you don't feel safe, why you don't want to talk, why you've changed your mind. You can simply say, I'm not comfortable with this. This isn't something I want to be a part of. No thank you, and then stop. Silence is where your power gathers. It's where manipulation starves. How to build that kind of boundary. Pre-commit to your no. Decide your boundary. Before you're under pressure, this gives you strength when emotions rise. Speak briefly, calmly, and with finality. No apologies, no over-explaining, no soft tone. Expect pushback and say nothing more. Let them sit with their own discomfort. It's not yours to carry. Journal your triggers. Notice when guilt shows up. That's where you're most likely to fold. Practice internal validation. Repeat to yourself, my peace doesn't require their approval. This is self-mastery. And most people never reach it because they're too addicted to being liked. The shift from approval to autonomy, when you stop explaining, something powerful happens. You take back your focus. You stop chasing validation. You reclaim your energy for yourself. You've started living from the inside, outrooted, not in the opinions of others, but in principles. And that shift changes everything. You stop overanalyzing how others perceive. You stop editing every sentence just to avoid being misunderstood. You no longer need to be liked, you need to be grounded. That's not detachment, that's emotional sovereignty. That's the Stoic way. What you think of me is none of my business. That one mindset frees you. And of course, when you stop explaining yourself, toxic people notice. They'll say you've changed, that you're cold, that you used to care more. Let them talk. What they're really saying is, you're no longer emotionally dependent on my approval, and that makes me powerless. Let them wrestle with their own irrelevance. It's not your burden to carry, because here's the truth. Toxic people don't just hurt you. They study you. They learn your reactions like a script. They memorize your triggers, the tone in your voice, the slight shift in your mood, the second you begin to unravel. And once they know your script, they'll weaponize it. This is emotional manipulation at its core. If they can predict you, they can control you. But when you become unpredictable, When your reactions are no longer reflexes, but choices, they lose control. They lose the playbook. You become unreadable. And unreadable people, they're unbreakable. Let's break it down. Manipulators rely on patterns. Why? Because patterns create predictability. And predictability is power. If they know guilt gets to youth, they'll guilt trip you. If they know yelling makes you fold, they'll raise their voice. If they know crying makes you stay, tears will appear right on cue. You think you're comforting someone in pain, but you're really responding to someone who's memorized your emotional buttons. You're too sensitive. You never listen. I guess you don't care anymore. It's not random. It's a strategy. And that strategy only works if you keep reacting the same way. But Stoicism offers a different power, unpredictability. The Stoics didn't just feel less, they reacted less. Because every impulsive reaction gives away data. It reveals your emotional map, your insecurities, your fears, your weak spots. But when you stay calm, say nothing at all, you stop giving them access. You become unreadable. And to manipulators, unreadable is terrifying. Why? Because their entire game depends on knowing what you'll do next. Break the turned, you break the entire system. Here's what it looks like in real life. Imagine someone always runs the same emotional play. They blame you, you defend, they escalate, you panic, they apologize, you forgive, cycle repeats. But now, imagine this, they blame you, you pause, you go silent. No defense, no reaction, no explanation. They escalate louder, still nothing. Suddenly, they're the only one shouting in the chaos they created. You didn't fight back. You didn't run, you just stood still, calm, clear. That's not passivity. That's psychological dominance. So how do you build this kind of boundary? You don't need to become cold. You just need to become less obvious. Here's how. Audit your patterns. What do you always say when someone guilts you? What's your automatic response to anger or tears? Insert a pause. Before reacting, count to 5. Let the emotion move through you instead of speak for you. Respond with curiosity. Ask instead of defend. What makes you say that? Or what do you need from me right now? Let go of the need to be understood. You don't need to explain everything. Let them stew in the silence. That's where their illusion cracks. Train. Detachment. Meditate. Journal. Practice staying calm under pressure. Because calm is not just a mood, it's a weapon. Sometimes, the most powerful change doesn't come from confrontation, but from quiet detachment. From the moment you stop being emotionally predictable, something shifts. Toxic people begin to falter. They start to question their manipulations. Their grip on your emotions weakens. Why? Because you're no longer feeding the game. You're no longer on the board. You're observing the game from a distant sand. That is where the real control begins. The less they know about your next move, the harder it becomes for them to script your downfall. This isn't about pretending to be strong. It's about building real strength, moving from emotional reactivity to calm, deliberate stillness. Stoicism teaches one of the hardest disciplines. You don't need to display every emotion you feel. Why? Because in a world where emotion is weaponized, your stillness becomes your armor. Predictability is comfort for them. Stillness, on the other hand, is power for you. Let them sit in confusion, wondering what you're thinking. Let them scramble to provoke you, frustrated when their tricks fall flat. You are no longer dancing in their emotional circus. You've become the quiet observer. And once you break your emotional habits, the knee-jerk reactions, the desperate explanations, the need to be understood, you become something rare, untriggerable. And in that silence, you gain something even rarer: respect. Manipulators feel powerless when they can't predict you, and they hate that. Because the second they lose control over your reactions, they realize something terrifying. They never really had control over you to begin with. And that realization, it haunts them. Let's be clear, not every provocation deserves your attention. In fact, the strongest move in a toxic interaction is often no move at all. Because toxic people don't thrive on truth. They thrive on your energy, your frustration, your confusion, your emotional availability, your need to be heard, to explain, to defend. But when you remove that fuel source, when your response is calm, still, or simply absent, you don't just step away from the game. You flip the entire board. Let's talk about energy exchange. Every interaction with a manipulator is a trade. You give emotion, they take control. You give explanations, they twist them. It's not a dialogue, it's a transaction. And your emotions are the currency. So what happens when you go still? When you stop engaging? You shut down the emotional ATM. Suddenly, they're bankrupt and they don't know what to do. And here's the biggest misconception. People think emotional intelligence means constantly being available, endlessly empathetic, always explaining and soothing. But that's not intelligence. That's servitude. Real emotional intelligence means knowing when to respond and when to withdraw. When silence speaks louder than any explanation. In toxic relationships, silence isn't weakness, it's precision. When they push, you don't move. When they prod, you don't flinch. Picture this: a narcissist pushes you, trying to trigger a reaction. You've changed, you're cold, you never cared about me. And you feel that old polar urge to explain, to correct, to defend, but instead, you do nothing. No reply, no expression, no emotional signal, just stillness. To a manipulator, this isn't just silence, it's psychological starvation, and it terrifies them. Because without your reactions, they lose their power. No reaction, no fuel, no fuel, no fire. Let me tell you a true story. A woman once told me her narcissistic ex bombarded her with 10, sometimes 30 messages a day after she went no contact. Not angry messages, emotional bait. I miss you. I'm broken without you. You always understood me. Please, just talk to me, she almost replied. Dozens of times. But then, something inside her clicked. She had finally seen it clearly. This was never about love. It was always about control. That realization hit her like a quiet storm. Steady, undeniable. So, she didn't block him. She didn't respond. She simply left his messages unopened. 3 days passed in silence. Then came his reply. You're cruel. You're heartless. You're not who I thought you were. And that's when it all clicked. Her silence had shattered him. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she played games, but because she had reclaimed something far more valuable than his attention, her peace. And she refused to trade that peace for anyone's approval. That's the terrifying power of Stoic silence. People fear silence more than they fear shouting, because silence forces them to sit alone with themselves. And manipulators, they can't stand that. They're addicted to chaos. They need noise so they don't have to hear the emptiness inside them. So when you go quiet, you do more than withdraw. You confront them with their own reflection. You make them face the truth. They're not in control anymore. That's the Stoic mindset. I don't need to win the argument, I just need to win myself back. But how do you train that kind of strength? How do you build the discipline to not react, especially when your body is screaming to respond? It's not easy. Your nervous system has been wired for survival, not for self-mastery. But here's how to start rewiring it. Step 1. Breathe before you speak. 3 deep breaths before reacting can turn a trigger into a choice. Step 2. Name the game. Ask yourself, is this a genuine need or a manipulation? If it's the latter, stay silent. Step 3. Embrace the discomfort. That urge to scream. That's not your truth, that's your trauma. Silence will feel unnatural at first, but that's how healing begins. Step 4. Create a ritual of release. After you're triggered, don't hold it in. Go for a walk, write it out. Let the emotion move somewhere safe. Step 5. Visualize yourself as a mountain, still grounded, unmoved by the wind or the storm. You don't have to respond to every insult. You don't need to correct every lie. Chaos doesn't require your commentary, because your silence sends a message louder than any words ever could. I see you, but I no longer belong to you. Let's be clear, silence is not avoidance, it's mastery. Not reacting isn't weakness. It's how you protect your energy. They're not worth a rise in your blood pressure. Every time you choose not to react, you're choosing yourself. You're choosing inner peace over external approval. And that's what makes silence the strongest psychological boundary. Words can be twisted, tone can be manipulated, your reactions can be used against you, but silence is untouchable. It's clean, it's calm, it's bulletproof. And when you stay silent consistently, people stop testing you because the lesson has been learned. This person can no longer be moved. This person is no longer theirs to manipulate. Let's make one thing clear. You don't owe your full self to everyone. Your energy, your truth, your dreams, your soft spots, these are sacred. But when you hand them out to easily, to freely, you give away something priceless. Your power. Toxic people don't just crave your presence. They crave access, emotional access. They study your fears. They memorize your weaknesses. They weaponize your story. That's why one of the strongest Stoic boundaries you can build is this: controlled exposure. Not everyone deserves to see all of you, because the more they know, the easier it is to control you. Ask yourself this: what makes you constantly doubt yourself? What drives your need to be liked, to be accepted by others? The truth is, toxic people aren't just troublemakers, they're emotional hackers. And your overexposure to them is the back door they use to access your emotional operating system. When you overshare too early, especially with people you haven't vetted, you're essentially handing them an emotional user manual to manipulate and control you. But when you train yourself to be emotionally minimalist, you become unpredictable. And unpredictable people cannot be controlled. Emotional intelligence isn't just about honesty, it's about discernment. Many confuse openness with authenticity. But let's be honest, being real doesn't mean being an open book. It's about choosing wisely. The Stoics never told you to put your heart on display. They advocated presence with restraint. They knew how to be honest without becoming prey. You can be kind, yet private. Warm, yet distant. Genuine, yet strategic. Because no matter how true or real something is, doesn't mean you have to share. It's a real-life example. Let's say you have a co-worker who seems overly interested in your personal life. At first, You assume they're just being friendly. They ask, "How's your family? What do you usually do after work?" And in good faith, you answer sincerely. But a week later, you hear them casually mention those details in front of your boss. They joke about your side hustle in front of other colleagues. You feel exposed, betrayed. But the real mistake wasn't trusting them. It was opening up before they were tested. And that moment taught you a harsh but vital lesson in Stoic self-discipline. Not everyone deserves the truth about you, and some people never will. Now let's talk about the 3 levels of oversharing. This mental shift can change everything. You're a layered human being. Not every layer should be visible to everyone. Level 1, public zone, polite, friendly, surface level, social interaction. Level 2, selective trust. Zone, reserved for those who've shown emotional maturity and consistency over time. Level 3, sacred circle, earned by those who've proven long-term loyalty and integrity. Controlling what and when you share is one of the most powerful boundaries you can set. It requires awareness of what to share, with whom, and when. And sometimes, the most powerful move is walking away without a single word. Ask yourself, do you feel emotionally drained after talking to certain people? Do you find yourself revealing personal details just to feel connected or accepted? Do others know too much about you while you know almost nothing about them? If the answer is yes, then you're bleeding emotional energy. And it's time to adjust your boundaries. So, how do you set these boundaries without coming off as cold? You don't have to shut down completely, but you do need to shift your default setting from unlimited sharing to intentional sharing. Here's how. 1. Delay disclosure. Take time to assess someone's emotional maturity before sharing anything personal. 2. Observe before you speak. See if they're sincere and self-aware, then consider opening up. 3. Use strategic ambiguity. You don't need to lie, but you also don't need to explain. A simple, "I'm focused on some personal goals right now," is more than enough. 4. Watch how they handle others' secrets. If they gossip to you, they'll gossip about you. 5. Be selective with vulnerability. Vulnerability is powerful, only when shared in safe spaces. This isn't manipulation, it's inner discipline. And when you master this boundary, what changes? You become unreadable to manipulators. You become a mystery to energy vampires. You become magnetic to emotionally intelligent people. Why? Because your restraint signals self-mastery, and self-mastery is rare. What's rare becomes valuable, and what's valuable is always respected. Remember this: you owe no one full access to your soul. In a world where everyone silence is sacred. In a world that rushes into intimacy too quickly, your ability to be selective is a revolutionary act. You don't have to fake small talk. You don't have to react with hurt when faced with a wounded soul. And you definitely don't have to bleed just to be seen. You can stay true to who you are. You can remain whole. You have the right to choose who gets access to your inner world, and in that choice, you reclaim one of your greatest truths. I'm not for everyone, and that's my power. There's a quiet skill that most strong people possess. It's not loud. It's not aggressive. It doesn't need to win arguments or destroy opponents. It's the power of redirection. Redirecting conversations, redirecting energy, redirecting attention without ever lowering your standards. Because this is how manipulators operate. They play mind games. They feed off your attention. They provoke. They blame. They toss out trap questions like, "Oh, So now you think you're better than everyone. Why are you acting so distant? I guess you just don't care anymore, huh? These aren't real questions. They're traps. Each line is part of a performance where they play the victim and cast you as the villain. And the moment you start explaining, defending, or softening yourself to someone who's already decided not to understand you, you lose your position. Stoic detachment is a form of rebirth. Stoics don't win by arguing. They win by refusing to play a game that costs them their inner peace. That's the essence of redirection. It's not about denying emotions. It's not about repressing the truth. It's about calmly refusing to participate in someone else's chaos. You don't need to say, "That's not what I meant. Stop twisting my words again." You simply say, "I'm not here to argue intentions. I'm here to grow, and that's enough." You don't need to justify. "I'm not ignoring you. I've just been busy." You just say, "I manage my time in ways that protect my peace." Short, clear, closed loop. No entry point for manipulation. No emotional reward for drama. This is the art of self-resurrection in every word you choose. Let's look at a few examples. Scenario 1. Passive guilt-tripping. They say, "Must be nice living in your own little world and ignoring everyone." Weak response. "I'm not ignoring you. I've just been really busy. Don't take it the wrong way." Stoic redirection. "I'm protecting my personal space. Nothing personal, just necessary." Scenario 2. Gaslighting disguised as jokes. They say, "Geez, you're so sensitive. I was just joking." Weak response. "Well, it didn't feel like a joke. You always say things that hurt people." Stoic redirection. "To me, respect isn't a joke, it's a standard." Scenario 3. Pressuring you to explain your growth. They say, "You've changed. You're not the same person anymore." Weak response. I guess I've just been busy or something." Stoic redirection. "I've grown, and my priorities reflect that." Each redirection does two things. 1. It helps you reclaim emotional control. 2. It shuts the door on manipulation with calm authority. Why is redirection so effective? Because psychologically, it starves toxic people of what they crave most. Your reacting, is surrender. Redirecting is strategy. When you redirect, you hold the frame. You steer the energy. You elevate the conversation or walk away from it completely. And that's what toxic people hate most. Why? Because they can no longer define you through their lens. They're forced to look in the mirror and see the chaos reflected back at them, building the muscle of redirection. Like any boundary, takes practice. Here's how you train it. First, pause before you react. Stillness is power. Don't rush to respond on impulse. Breathe first. Remember this. Redirection is not avoidance. It is a conscious choice. Say it briefly and clearly. "I'm not willing to discuss this." You don't need to explain again. You don't need to engage in an argument that will only drain you. Don't turn the conversation into a drama. Choose calmness, because calmness is a form of strength. Third, stand your ground. No need to get defensive. No need to respond to win a battle. Your quiet resolve is not weakness itself. Mastery.4. Don't over-explain your withdrawal. The more you speak, the more you dilute the power of your silence. Strength often lies in simplicity. Fifth, a calm gaze and steady voice are the strongest tools for setting boundaries. Your body language is a declaration of self-worth. It needs no poetic speech. A member of our community once shared, I used to get pulled into emotional arguments with my narcissistic sister. She always twisted the story, forcing me to defend things I never even did. Then, one day, I simply said, "This isn't a conversation I want to continue." And I got up and walked away. That moment changed everything. That wasn't weakness. That was a strategic retreat. Because sometimes, the wisest move is to refuse to play a toxic game from the start. Here's a philosophical truth. Freedom lies in your ability to control your emotional frame. The Stoics knew this thousands of years ago, something modern psychology is only now confirming. If you don't govern your emotional state, you are not truly free. Anyone who can trigger your reaction controls you. Anyone who can shift your mood holds your peace. Anyone who forces you to over-explain steals your dignity. But once you master the art of redirection, you become untouchable. You become immune to emotional manipulation, anchored in your core values, no longer driven by the need for approval. And remember, this isn't just a technique, it's an inner transformation. There's an unspoken rule the Stoics lived by. You don't get what you deserve. You get what you tolerate. People don't listen to what you say. They watch what you repeat. If you always forgive betrayal, they'll betray you again. If you respond to manipulation with kindness, they'll get sneakier. If you stay after being disrespected, you've taught them that respect isn't required. Let that sink in. Your presence is a classroom. Every day, you're teaching others how to treat you by how you behave. We all live by a silent rule book, whether we realize it or not. And your actions are what write that rule book. Toxic people are excellent readers of it. They don't ask what you want. They observe what you allow. If you accept passive-aggressive jokes, cold glances, and inconsistent love, they'll understand. That's your limit. They don't need to break your boundary. They just need to learn how to dance around it. That's why boundaries aren't what you say. Boundaries are what you enforce without speaking. Stoics don't talk much about boundaries. They embody them. They walk with a presence that says, "My time is valuable. My energy is sacred. My peace is non-negotiable." Not because they're loud, but because they're clear. When you live with deep self-respect, you don't need to say, "I have boundaries." The room adjusts, the tone shifts, the energy rebalances itself just by your presence. That's not ego. That's silent authority, a form of energy that toxic people cannot manipulate. Think of it like a peaceful ecosystem. People reflect what you radiate. Human behavior is extremely sensitive. We adjust to how you behave, not what you ask for. If you're always too accessible, they'll stop valuing your time. If you accept emotional chaos, they'll bring more drama. If you break your own rules, they'll never follow them. But if you stay calm, you'll attract calm. If you stay consistent, you'll earn respect. If you radiate the energy of discipline, people will either raise their standards or retreat. And in either case, you win. Here's a real-life example. The story of a woman who used to be the empath, always trying to understand, always forgiving. In her family, she was the one who stepped back. Her older sister was the opposite, constantly emotionally manipulative, crying when caught doing wrong, raging when questioned, and using silence as a weapon when things didn't go her way. And so this woman kept apologizing, even when she had done nothing wrong, until one day she stopped. She stopped apologizing, stopped lowering herself to maintain fake peace. Her sister immediately snapped, "So you don't care about family anymore?" She calmly replied, "I care enough not to enable this toxicity anymore." Then she went silent. No explanations, no arguments, no more emotional dancing. It was her silence, her steady posture, her calm gaze that ended the old cycle. Because her presence said what words never could. You can no longer guilt-trip me into submission. Walking away in silence, without anger, without revenge, is a form of teaching. Sometimes the greatest lesson you give others is when you walk away without complaint. When someone loses access to you, not out of hatred, but out of calm conviction, they're forced to face a truth they never considered. You're actually serious. Your boundaries are real. And their actions now carry real consequences. You don't need to convince them to change. Your absence is the lesson they never expected. That is the power shift of silence. Want to master this kind of boundary? Start by identifying where your energy is being drained. Are you staying silent about what's exhausting you? Acting instead of explaining? Don't say, "Don't speak to me that way." Just withdraw, letting people feel the distance. Don't explain. Let your silence speak, walking away from chaos with certainty. You owe no one access to your mind, replacing those who hurt you with habits that restore your peace. Your presence should be a place of balance, not survival. Inner strength always outweighs external approval. This is the highest boundary in Stoicism. You no longer need to be liked to feel worthy. You no longer chase connection if it costs you clarity and peace. You're okay being misunderstood, as long as you're at peace. And that shift dismantles every toxic pattern faster than any confrontation ever could. Because you're sending a clear message. I respect myself too much to let you teach me how to disrespect myself. They once thought they could control you with confusion, drain you with guilt, or crush you with silence. But you've outgrown the game, not by shouting, not by fighting, but by building a mind they can no longer manipulate. You didn't just leave a toxic person. You came home to your own peace, power, and principles. Because the truth is, most people don't realize boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges to the highest version of yourself. And when you master these 7 psychological boundaries, you no longer wrestle with chaos. You begin to command your life with clarity, courage, and calm. So let them wonder why you changed. Let them question why they can no longer reach you. Let your silence be the loudest boundary you've ever set, because now you don't need to prove your worth. You are living it. If this video touched something deep in you, don't scroll away just yet. Re-watch these 7 boundaries. Send it to someone still stuck in an emotional battlefield. And most importantly, hit subscribe if you're ready to live with unshakable clarity and stoic strength every single day. Because on this channel, we don't just talk about self-mastery, we practice it in silence and let the results speak.